Our next presenter is Dr. Diane Wenger, Associate Professor of History in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Dr. Wenger earned her PhD from the University of Delaware and is the author of A Country Storekeeper in Pennsylvania, Creating Networks in Early America, 1790 to 1806, published by Penn State Press in 2008. Her research interests include colonial and antebellum America, women's history, and the material culture and everyday life of early Americans. The title of Dr. Wenger's presentation this afternoon is From Single Brother to Celebrated Snuff Maker, the story behind Demuth's tobacco shop. Please welcome Dr. Diane Wenger.
In history, I often feel challenged and frustrated as I look for ways to make material interesting and, dare I say, relevant to 21st century students. There are many ways that I might attempt to meet this challenge, but today I want to demonstrate one potentially fruitful approach. Case studies of individuals based on primary sources can provide unique insights into the past. By primary sources, I mean documents and material artifacts that date from the time under study. I like to think of these sources as a window through which we can catch a glimpse, not the whole picture, but a glimpse of early American life. Such case studies may help students, especially those who are not particularly fond of history, to think of the subject differently. Not as a set of dry facts to be memorized and then forgotten after the test, but as fascinating stories of ordinary people whose lives illustrate how the society and economy of our nation evolved and changed over time. In addition, by sharing my methodology and research with our history majors in upper level classes, I can provide concrete examples of how to conduct a research project, aid, and I hope even inspire them in their own work. My current research focuses on one such individual, snuff maker Christopher Demuth. Demuth established a very successful tobacco sales and manufacturing business, which operated for 240 years in the same location in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is about 100 miles south of here in Lancaster County. Demuth's parents were German-speaking immigrants from Eastern Europe. They came to Savannah, Georgia in the 1730s to help establish a missionary settlement for the Unitas Fratrum, or Moravian Church. From Savannah, they moved to Germantown, where Christopher and a younger brother were born. Christopher's father died when the boys were quite young, and their family then moved, the mother moved the boys, to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Bethlehem was a closed Moravian community in the Lehigh Valley, where all town residents had to be members of the Moravian Church. Under Bethlehem's organizational system, residents were divided by age, by sex, and by marital status into groups known as choirs. Nothing to do with music, just the name of the group. Members lived and worked together in their choirs rather than in traditional family groups. This means that after they moved to Bethlehem, Christopher's mother lived with other widows in the community in the widow's house, while her young sons lived apart from her. Whoop, we went too far. Okay, lived apart from her in the small boys' choir, whose membership record is shown here. As an adult, Demuth lived in the single brother's house, a large building still standing in Bethlehem today, which included dormitory rooms as well as workshops. The single brothers were all assigned professions. Christopher trained as a cabinet maker and worked in the community wood shop, and he also helped work on the town's mills, and this is going to give him a skill that will come in handy later on in his life. As he matured, Christopher Demuth found this life did not suit him very well. Congregational records, mostly written in German script, suggest that Demuth may have been too individualistic for communal life. In particular, he was not content working for a master carpenter for a weekly wage. He wanted to be his own boss. He wanted to be paid for what he made with his own hands. So in 1767, Demuth parted company with Bethlehem Brethren and moved to Lancaster. This was an open town where he could still attend a local Moravian church, but was not subject to the discipline of communal living. There he courted and married Elizabeth Hartoffel, whose father was a tobacconist, and there Demuth learned how to make snuff, which became his specialty. Snuff was made from tobacco leaves that had been salted and fermented for a number of weeks. The tobacco was then dried, milled, made fine, and put through a sieve, and if desired, it could be flavored at that point. Now, snuff was very, very popular in early America. It was enjoyed by both men and women. It was a smokeless tobacco that was inhaled into the nostrils, so it could be used by workers on the job without fear of starting a fire. Snuff was affordable enough so all social classes could buy it, and it was enjoyed at all levels of society. Elaborate boxes designed to hold one's pocket supply of snuff became status symbols for the upper class. They adopted a special ritual of bowing to one another with snuff box extended, tapping the box 3 times, and then taking a pinch of the powdered tobacco and snuffing it up the nostrils. This was followed by a hearty cleansing sneeze. Snuff was healthy. It was considered good for you. An 18th century snuff maker, another one, Richard Boyer, advertised that his snuff was a cure for the headache and a great preserver of the eyes. So the popularity of snuff would be the key to Demuth's success. And I don't know why we're running ahead here, but let's go back. Okay. He and his father-in-law opened a tobacco shop in the Hartoffel family home on East King Street, shown here. After his father-in-law's death, Demuth purchased the building and moved in with his wife and family, and they would eventually have 10 children here. At first, Demuth ground snuff with a hand-powered machine that he probably used in a small building somewhere on the property, while the sales space was in the first floor of the family home, where the store remains to this day. About 1800, Demuth expanded his operation and built a large brick snuff factory in the rear of the property, and he installed more powerful snuff milling equipment there. Now, the preferred way to grind any product at this time would have been water power, like a grist mill. But there's no water in this part of Lancaster, so Demuth was forced to run his mill by horsepower, using either a donkey, there we go, or a horse to turn the mill. By the early 1800s, he was producing enormous quantities of his specialty snuff, rapee, which is a dark, moist, flavored snuff. He bought his raw material to grind the snuff from a merchant in Philadelphia who imported it from the southern tobacco-growing regions, including Virginia and Kentucky. The tobacco came to Lancaster from Philadelphia in horse-drawn wagons, and it was packed in large barrels known as hogsheads that weighed up to 1 ton each. Demuth's records show that between 1803 and 1815, he purchased an average of 16,358 pounds of tobacco annually. So about the same time that he enlarged the snuff factory, he's really growing the business. He installed a carved wooden figure on the sidewalk on the front of his house to advertise his business. This wooden tobacco man, shown here, was carved by Demuth's son, John, and it is said to be the earliest example of an American tobacco advertising figure. This figure would have attracted retail customers into Demuth's shop, and he also did a sizable wholesale business, selling his snuff in bulk quantities to storekeepers who came from throughout Pennsylvania, as well as Maryland, Washington, and Virginia. These customers were mostly men, but some women, including Mary Long, whose account is shown here, also traveled to Lancaster to buy snuff from Demuth. By 1816, Demuth was 78 years old, and he was feeling his age. A stroke had left his right side paralyzed, and he was suffering greatly from constant rheumatic pain. That year, he informed his customers that he was turning the business over to one of his sons, Jacob, who was already working with him in the shop. The following year, Jacob placed his own advertisement in the Lancaster Journal. To reinforce the message that the Demuth shop was indeed still open, Jacob reminded readers that bottles of Rappee, McAvoy, and Scotch Snuffs were available at the old stand, the same old place, on wholesale and retail terms. I cannot explain why the ad calls his father Christian Demuth, except that they usually abbreviated it CHR, and the printer may not have known the first name. The exact formula for what became known as Demuth's celebrated snuff remains a closely guarded secret. However, an inventory taken when Jacob Demuth died included 147 pounds of lavender, along with quantities of oil of bergamot, oil of lemon, oil of lavender, and oil of roses. So these were likely the flavorings that he used in his particular blend. The formula may have changed over the years, though. During recent renovations to the Demuth family home, workers found a handwritten snuff recipe that included, among other ingredients, whiskey and soap. Jacob's sons and grandsons followed him in the business. And for 200 years, let's go back to that one, a Demuth male descendant operated the shop. As consumer tastes in tobacco changed, the Demuths enlarged the factory and expanded into cigar and chewing tobacco production and sales. By the late 19th century, the shop had become a popular gathering place for locals. Photos from the turn of the century show that it was also already functioning as a de facto museum of tobacco culture because of everything that was assembled in there over the years, as well as a sales space. Over the years, proceeds from the business enabled the Demuth family to prosper and achieve prominence in their community. In an interesting twist, the tobacco business also provided the wherewithal for Christopher's great-great-grandson, Charles Demuth, to travel widely and become an acclaimed artist. Charles is the young boy, and the picture on the left, and his father, Ferdinand, who was the owner of the shop, is pictured on the photo on the right. Charles Demuth, as an adult, became part of the avant-garde early 20th century community that included Ezra Pound, Gertrude Stein, Alfred Stieglitz, and George O'Keeffe, among others. When chronic illness forced Demuth to return to Lancaster, he spent the last years of his life in the family home, which was next to the tobacco shop, interpreting local scenes through his art. Today, he is regarded as one of America's preeminent modernist painters. Meanwhile, as the 20th century wore on, attitudes toward tobacco changed dramatically for the worse. Perhaps for these reasons, the last male heir to the family business decided he was not interested in running a tobacco shop, and he opted for another career. Dorothea Demuth, whose son it was who declined that career in tobacco, ran the shop for a time after her husband's death in 1978, making her the first female proprietor of the business. But in 1986, she turned the property over to the nonprofit Demuth Foundation, whose building you see here, whose mission it is to bring public awareness to artist Charles Demuth and his legacy. The foundation operates a museum next door to the tobacco shop in the house where Charles Demuth grew up, and for a time the foundation also operated the tobacco shop. In keeping with the foundation's main focus on the artist, however, rather than on his tobacconist roots, modern art being much easier to celebrate these days than snuff and cigars, the foundation ultimately chose to sell the business while retaining ownership of the historic shop building. So the shop continued much as before after it left the Demuth family, selling tobacco products and welcoming visitors to view its remarkable interior, which was, this picture was taken in 2009. So, because the shop was such a community institution, it came as a great shock to many of us when it closed abruptly in December 2010, following the death of the new business owners. Today, the fate of the shop remains uncertain. The closing is described as temporary, and Demuth Foundation spokespeople have declined to comment on their plans for the building, so we don't know what's going to happen next. Perhaps given current attitudes toward tobacco, this is the end of the historic Demuth shop as an active business. If so, that will simply begin a new chapter to the fascinating Demuth story, one that reveals so much to this researcher and to my students about changes in religious practices, social customs, technology, and healthy behavior over the past 200 years. Thank you.